I had been a teacher for 17 years, 14 of them spent located in a small farming community. The first 8 years seemed normal, like you would expect, teaching, grading papers, and running a classroom. During the first 5 years, 1999-2004, I worked hard and ran the classroom with all the energy that I had. Day after day, my students learned. The middle 5 was depressing. I found an easier way to teach, but my marriage had reached a meltdown. The last 5 were influenced by the military, and I was fired. I was considered a good teacher by my students. I tried, I cared, I knew my stuff, and I knew how to break things down so any willing student could learn the basic science of chemistry. But my students are, for the most part, unwilling or unable to apply themselves. 1/3 of the students have language problems, another third are dragging their feet, making it hard to teach. But it is not their fault. For one, there are no benchmarks or checkpoints that students are required to learn. If students are held accountable, the school will eventually get shut down for having a low graduation rate. So schools like mine where half of the kids are academically at a 4th grade level. Kids are smart enough to realize that school sucks. It was designed that way. Kids are programmed by our culture to seek instant gratification. All pressure and responsibility is put on the teacher, and so is the blame. Instead of helping education, the system bogs down the teacher with the sole responsibility of educating students and being accountable. They take a test on the standards, but in order to graduate, you just have to pass a teacher's class. The system scapegoats on the overwhelmed teacher that is given an impossible task, while the system undermines and prevents a properly educated citizen with threats of pulling federal funding from a school that doesn't graduate a certain percentage of its students. Society reinforces the system by buying into it, shifting their own responsibility for the education of their child on a broken system that is designed to fail. Most parents are uneducated, believing the system is there to educate. Little do they know what it's really designed to do, maintain their own control of the wealth while destroying the poor. The instant gratification has been folded into our culture on purpose since television appeared in our homes. Kids want things they see on commercials, and it is similar to addiction. Then, the media plays up sexual awareness on all fronts. At middle school, they confuse the shit out of kids right when they are going through puberty. They shake up what classes were, and the social interactions take on a whole different aspect than elementary schools. And finally, high school. A lot of addicts are made during the high school years. That's where you meet all your bad friends. Little do people know, schools are designed for molding an obedient population that's greedy to have things. The system on all fronts is designed to enslave and consume life. The true goal of education is to make a population complacent with the way things are, programmed to accept nonsense, and creating obedient followers having faith in the system they were indoctrinated into. Get up, get there on time, follow the rules and go through the motions until you graduate with a meaningless diploma that should say, I accept this bullshit. Every day you arrive on time to a place that you really don't want to go to, and do things that you really don't want to do, and truly are meaningless for the most part to everyday life. And then you do the same thing in a job or a career that pretty much has the same disconnect associated with it because you're working for someone else instead of yourself, just like school taught you to do. You follow an authority figure who really has no authority over anything except the kids in the classroom. And if the population relinquishes their own inner self to some dictator in the classroom, then they'll learn to have faith in our fake leaders propped up by big money to convince us that they are sincerely here to try and make things better. I know better. They're here to keep us confused and powerless, and we are trained from birth to accept this, and schools are here to pump out obedient citizens complacent in their blind faith. Follow the rules, work hard, and buy into the bullshit they are selling, and then you're a good citizen. Fear is the guiding light behind our blind faith. It keeps us from changing reality and making it a better place. People are too afraid of losing what they spent their life to achieve without realizing the deeper meaning of it all. Okay, enough of my rants about the true intentions behind education's design within the bigger system that our rulers have made for us. I need to get to why and how I lost my job. How they fired me. For almost 10 years I worked in a high school where I never knew any staff or employees from a military background. The last 5 years, I saw 6 consecutive teachers hired that were from military backgrounds. First there were these 2 teachers, Mr. Fatnap and Mr. Mac. Fatnap was a career Marine with a computer background in physics, while Mac was a computer engineer. The role of Fatnap, as far as I could tell, was to poke ridiculous comments my way, like he opened the door and the door hit me, and he said something like, hey, you're supposed to know about momentum and collisions. And I say, yay, understanding fire doesn't mean that you don't get burned. I believe that was his role. I know that he popped off comments, like I said, and that's all I could say for his role. He left before I became fully aware of my stalker problems, and I can't say for certain a definite role of Mr. Fatnap. Mr. Mac, however, stayed long enough for me to figure him out. He was cool and buddied up with me like everybody does, because I'm a nice guy and easy to get along with. Mac knew and believed in all the conspiracies that I know are true, like 9/11, population control programs, HAARP, mind control, Morgellons disease, etc., etc. His one role was to ignore me in teachers' meetings once we engaged in conversation. Like, every time we sat near each other in a staff meeting, he would initiate conversation, and we would get into a good discussion between ourselves. And, every single fucking time, I mean every time, I would eventually respond or continue the conversation, loud like I always am, and he would just stare straight ahead and act like I said nothing. This happened on a regular basis, and it was done on purpose. I saw it too many times. In about 2012, we hired an electrical engineer that had retired out of the Navy. His role was to slowly gather materials and hoard them away in his room. I would find on many occasions that I couldn't find what I needed, and Mr. Kimball had the shit in one of his cabinets. By September 2014, Mr. Kimball had every poster in his room, had rearranged all the chemicals and hid them in his room, and accumulated most of everything, while my room was empty and bare. Mr. Saucedo came along and was fresh out of the Marines. His role was to fuck the hottest teacher at THS, Mrs. Quintana. You see, the gang stalking protocol that has developed is one that they have been playing into my life since New Year's 2014. They tease me with beautiful women that are playing the role. One day in February 2014, I took a cruise down to Rite Aid, and I then went to the gas station and then back home. I must have seen 12 beautiful 20-somethings along the way, and usually I would be lucky to see one. Two young ladies were sitting on the tailgate at Rite Aid, eating ice cream and looking my way right when I got there. Another was inside and got in line right before I did. On my way to the gas station, I saw one talking to another on the sidewalk, and they were waiting for me to turn onto the block before they resumed their roles. I straight up saw them waiting for me, and saw the moment they saw me, and I saw their activity change into their acting role made just for me. I had two pull up beside me while I was getting gas, and they looked inviting, too inviting, like they were just setting me up to act the fool and then diss me. I just smiled and waved. A few days later in Walmart, I saw this really hot chick pacing back and forth as I paid for my groceries and began towards the exit. I was watching her, and she took one too many paces because by the time she turned her direction and paced back my way, I was close to her and she was surprised and quickly turned 180 and assumed her roll towards the exit, staying right in front of me and ditching to the side just before exiting. These bitches were teasing me, and Mr. Saucedo was banging Mrs. Quintana to hurt my feelings and further drive me into despair. He also mentioned a couple times that we should hang out, but I never did. I assume he was also sent to befriend me and get close. It is possible that he was hired and had no clue what was happening, a decoy. He was the only teacher mentioned here that did not spend his whole life in the military. The next teacher with military background they hired was Mr. Meadows, hired the year I got let go. I learned his role near the end of September when I happened to tell him that my brother is an NSA agent that stalks me, and he adamantly stood his ground that there are no NSA agents in the States. He would say, "There's no NSA here in the States. They're all over in Egypt, Iran, Afghanistan, etc., etc." He authoritatively denied my fact that my brother's an agent that stalks me. But I know better, and just like any common folk telling Newton that his law of gravity was not correct, I know not to listen to common folk and manipulators of public perception. Mr. Meadows was there to gang up on me against my claims for what was going on in my life. This brings me to Mr. Baitalot. I knew within 3 minutes of meeting him why he was there. He was a military career guy hired in 2014 as the principal, coming from Mendota where he had arrived in January of that same year. Who knows where he came from before that, but his history of getting colleagues fired was described during our first staff meeting. He was there to get rid of me, and I knew this the moment he introduced himself. October 7th was my last actual day in the classroom, and I haven't had a single moment of missing that job. Thank God for NSA gang stalking for getting me out of that unpleasant career. They worked feverishly to get me the hell out of that hellhole. How they did it was from the word of a teacher's aide in my classroom every day, a lady from the community. Perfect plan, right? None of my official military stalkers needed to be involved, and this teacher aide ratted me out 3 times before they got something that stuck. So I took one class period on October 3rd and I explained to my students what was wrong with Mr. Pope and why I was not at the top of my game as a teacher. I told stories of how I know that my brother is an NSA spy that stalks me, the same type of stories that I'm telling in this book, and I was released for doing what every teacher does, telling personal stories of their life. Except I did not do it every day or once a week, like other teachers. I did it for just one single day. Since I used classroom time to teach things that I wasn't hired to teach, they got rid of me. I did let one student watch The Sitter on a computer in the back, and they got me on, allowing pornography in the classroom. Fuck this system, it is built on bullshit and lies. And there were 3 gang stalkers that were not of military background, and I'll describe them here before closing this chapter. The first one was Mr. Flores, a chemistry teacher gone administrator. He was responsible for not getting supplies ordered, so that I would not have what I needed, and not be able to teach to my potential. Mr. Flores' other role that I know of was to badmouth me almost every morning on the school intercom, where I had no way to respond. "Mr. Pope, are you here today? Mr. Pope, are your students listening today? Mr. Pope, are you teaching your students today? I'm glad to see Mr. Pope back to work today. These were some of his inclusions into the morning announcements. He knew his role. But nobody listens to Mr. Pope. All they did was harass me. The other teacher, my good friend Mr. Mann, retired in June of 2013, the month where I finally computed 100% that my brother in the NSA stalks me. He said goodbye to me in the office, and I felt his sadness for me. I thought it was because I had to stay in that classroom, and as a teacher I understood his sadness. But he wasn't feeling my future career as his source of sadness, he was feeling my life as a target. He retired 2 blocks away from me in Kerman, within eyesight of my house. What a coincidence. I have confided in him twice since he'd moved close, and he is suspect, but I'm not sure of his role. Maybe a mole, so I have a close friend to confide in, and the spies remain with control of the game to the bitter finish. And then there is Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer was acquainted with me way back in 1992-ish. My original stalker, Troy, and I were walking down the sidewalk past a pizza joint in Chowkilla at night. A white van with golden planes across its door is parked out front, and a Hispanic teacher is coming out with a few 15-year-old girls and boys. Troy turns to him and bucks up, and heads towards him saying, "What's your problem, wetback? I'll fuck you up. Yeah, you better get the fuck out of here." And Mr. Kramer rushed off ASAP. Troy said he could tell that he was a racist border brother, and he could tell by the look in his eyes. This occurred after I was told by Troy that I was going to end up being a schoolteacher and laughed at me like he knew more about my life's future than I did. As far as I know, Mr. Kramer was one of the main players planted to stalk me at THS. He was principal in 2005 and was the administrator that made my job most difficult. He assigned me to freshmen and gave me earth science while handing half of my chemistry juniors to other teachers. And that was his most damaging role. And Mr. Kramer and Mr. Mann hated each other, and this supports my intuitive nature for who's who, and I have little doubt that I'm right. And that is how the military secret operations pried me out of that classroom. They stalked me from all angles and waited for the community classroom helper to rat me out until something stuck. Mr. Kramer talks about his life in class almost every day, and I did it once and got fired. I definitely am not at home in America. I despise this place for the war it secretly waged against me for over 20 years without my knowing. America is my enemy, the money controllers in particular. Maybe the whole world is my enemy, at least the rich elite. I am battling for my life against NSA gang stalking, and am now fully aware of it.